Welcome to the Industrial IoT Spotlight, your number one spot for insight from industrial IoT thought leaders who are transforming businesses today. With your host, Eric Walenza.
Welcome back to the Industrial IoT Spotlight. This is the third episode of our three-part discussion with David Knight, the CEO and founder of Turbine. In episode 2, we explored Turbine's technology differentiation. We'll now end our discussion with a practical review of several solution deployments. I think we've gone through the major components of the system. Let's look at a couple of things that you're excited about in 2018. Or in 2017, if there's some cases of customers already looking at it and see from specific end user. And I guess we have multiple users, right? We have the provider of the data, the user of the data, and then potentially some intermediaries. How would a transaction look like? What are some of the transactions that you're working with now?
So now we are trying to do an IoT data marketplace. The interesting thing is that, as I've mentioned in prior segments, we've really got a lot of effort to figure out what are the issues we have to solve and really solve them well for large organizations to want to participate and then sort of talking about those other companies, these are all processes of removing friction from the process. And some of it's purely emotional, even at the level of a whole company. I'm scared. I don't know about this. I want to do it or I have reasons to do it, but I'm scared. So we've had to really deal with how you overcome those things. Now, having said all of that, again, everything I'm saying is very boil the oceans by its nature. But we are starting with a small crucible right now that we can get our hands around. So we decided initially, as you said at the top of the podcast, to focus on transportation. And we do mean that in all of its modalities, not just cars. And the first thing I realized is that when I would talk to potential users or other people, influencers, venture capitalists, and so on, it's kind of hard, unless you're living in the middle of this, to get the idea that sensor data from one source could be used for something totally unrelated to the original intent for the generation of the data. So I'll give you a very fun example. Scary in its moment, but fun to contemplate later. So in the San Francisco Bay Area in early January, there was an earthquake. It took place in the middle of the night, something like 2:45 in the morning. It jolted everybody out of bed. Now, because the earthquake took place at that hour of the morning, it was almost 100% that people would be at home, sitting, reading, typing something, probably sleeping, but they're not going to be in a car or at the mall or at work. They're probably at home. And that's salient because what happened when the earthquake hit is that everybody jumped up or woke up. And so some enterprising data scientists at the company Fitbit, who makes, of course, wearable fitness trackers, very cleverly looked at all the readings from people's Fitbits, because most people register their Fitbits and it says where I live and it puts my data in the cloud. So they mined that data, and it was almost uncanny to see that you could tell by the shock and rise of somebody's heart rate where they were in relationship to the epicenter of the earthquake. It's fascinating. You can look this up. It's fascinating. And so it's actually so close to the U.S. Geological Survey's maps. It's astonishing. And so when you buy a Fitbit, you weren't thinking, you know what, one day I'm going to be a human seismograph. But in that instant in time, everybody in Northern California who had a Fitbit became a seismograph. And then they were back to, what am I doing next? So that's a sensor that people are wearing on their wrist, bought with the intention of tracking how many footsteps I take and my exercise and all that kind of stuff, and my sleep patterns. They were thinking about being a seismograph. And in the same way, we need to really get people to start thinking about that, moving, using the data for the non-traditional mechanisms. And we really believe that eventually those will overwhelm the initial intention. We've actually had companies who make things like cars come to us and say, for example, when we electrify our cars, all those engine control unit things will be gone that are doing, say, capturing ambient air temperature. would we want to keep those sensors on the car, even if they're not needed for the vital running of the car, because they could make more money for the car? And that is the kind of conversations we're starting to have with big vendors. So let me tell you about how we're kind of kicking this off. We approached a mid-sized American city. We haven't announced this yet, but I'll tell you generally what it is, and said, could we tap your city vehicles, not taxis or anything that belongs to individuals, but your big fleets of city vehicles? You can put telematics devices on them, and now we can get the data from things like anti-lock brakes, steering, engine control, whether the doors are opening and shutting, all that kind of neat stuff that modern cars have, and beam it into the cloud, and then it's processed into Turbine. So we actually got the first tranche of vehicles. They equipped them with telematics devices. We don't make those, but they were equipped with them by this city just in time for a convention in early January, where we had one-on-one meetings with a whole bunch of companies like automakers. And it was really cool because we were able to show them how a vehicle would generate a stream of data like, my door's open, my door's shut, the seatbelt was clipped, it was unclipped, the engine was accelerating, here's my velocity. And then we slice and dice that into individual metadata instances. So now instead of a bunch of data from one vehicle, you get barometric pressure from all the vehicles. And now it's codified, and you can see this right now at beta.turbine.io. You can see exactly what I'm talking about. And it's really cool because now if I'm trying to figure out whether or not to put on my special event, I can get micro weather maps across the city that have never been available in history and are only available because we now have a seamless way to get the data from the car and then present it to you, the analyst, in a way that's usable to you. On the other hand, wheel slippage and anti-lock brake activations might tell you something spilled on the road. So send out the road maintenance people. Since we're recording this in wintertime, a big problem in lots of parts of the world is black ice. And even the best AI camera systems can't really figure out black ice yet. I mean, we have enough trouble ourselves with our eyes. But the car knows there's black ice. The car knows exactly that there's black ice because the wheels start slipping and the traction control starts activating and the ABS starts going on even when you just tap the brakes. So that is really a great way to take data that the car is already sensing and maybe send out the road maintenance guys, or if it's, in parts of the U.S., they'll come out with the guys that put salt on the roads. And this also might be used by an actuarial to say, oh boy, there's a big freeze happening that wasn't even, as much worse than forecast. Maybe I need to talk to my customer, or I'm going to change their premiums, or whatever they're doing. And these are all the same sensor inputs driving all these different kinds of use cases. So we decided to help create a crucible for this very thing with this city. And now that we have vehicles being hooked up, we're now talking to all the big car companies, pretty much all of them, about adding to this basket of data from this one geographic region. And then we're going to add traffic sensors that we're getting from the city. We're going to be adding things from trucking fleets, just a whole bunch of sources, buildings even, smart street lamps that they're installing. And it's going to be a really great, sort of a proving ground, if you will, for taking IoT data from a multiplicity of sources and fanning that data out in a now characterized way to a whole bunch of use cases that have nothing to do with the original sources. So it's like the Fitbit becomes a seismograph on steroids. And we just got the beginnings of that working in early January in the United States. We're very interested in doing that with a few other cities. And this has long legs to it. Everything we're doing now, these aren't dead-end pilots or POCs. These become effectively permanent over time and scale around the world. And it's a great way for us to really start looping in the transportation world in a meaningful way. And over time, this will start to get monetized and therefore proving out that this data really does have value.
The Chinese, I think also in Korea, they really build these super apps, right? That kind of do everything from my wife, she pays for everything on WeChat, right? Everything. Well, WeChat and Alipay, right? But from your phone bill to your utilities and even paying the down payment for housing, for buying a house, right? Pretty much everything goes through there.
It's unbelievable. I was just with one of our angel investors spends about half his time in Shanghai, and we went, a bunch of us went to the San Francisco has this big farmers market every Saturday morning in the ferry building where, literally the building where the ferries go across the bay. And they just set up this brilliant farmer's market around the outskirts of this big building. And my friend had just come back from Shanghai. He said, isn't it amazing that here in the alleged tech capital of the world, where you must use cash for most of these vendors, and some take Square just because Square headquarters is up the street, and they made a point of having these people use Square. And he said, in Shanghai, I could walk up to anybody on the street and pay for something with my Alipay or my WeChat. And I said, that is amazing. China is just so far beyond the West on this stuff now.
Last year, I think it was literally 64 times more e-commerce or mobile commerce transactions by value in China than in the U.S. So it's, orders of magnitude in terms of the adoption rate here. David, maybe last question here, but how you said you got all the government reaches out to you. So I guess people know how to get in touch with you. But for folks that are listening to the podcast, what's the best way for them to reach out to you and your team?
The best way, if you want to reach us on good old email, just info@turbine.com. It gets, fanned out to all of us. And turbine.com, remember turbines with an E, TERBINE.com. There's a form. If you're interested in participating in our beta testing because you have IoT data, you're interested in exchanging or monetizing, or if you're looking for data, there's a pretty easy form that also gets routed to the right people instantly. And of course, we're on Turbine, at Turbine on Twitter. We're Turbine on Facebook and Turbine on LinkedIn. I do not have a Turbine on WeChat yet, but I think I'll go set one up.
David, thanks so much for taking the time today. Super fascinating.
Yeah, thank you. And have a good day.
Thanks for tuning in to another edition of the Industrial IoT Spotlight. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at IoT ONE HQ and to check out our database of case studies on IoT1.com. If you have unique insight or a project deployment story to share, we'd love to feature you on a future edition. Write us at eric.walenza@iot1.com.